Trump was asked if he'd rule out using military force to get control of Greenland and the Panama Canal, and Trump would not rule that out. How would acquiring that land help everyday Americans better afford their day-to-day expenses?
Well, first of all, Brianna, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Listen, President Trump is bringing us into a golden age of America. This is the new manifest destiny, reacquiring the Panama Canal, acquiring Greenland, renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. This is the light of America expanding. You know, we have a very clear strategic interest geopolitically, both in Greenland and in the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal, as you know, was created with the blood, toil, tears, and sweat of American citizens. We put an enormous amount of money into it. I don't think we ever should have relinquished control of the Panama Canal.
Number one, does anyone remember the MAGA campaign promise of militaristic global expansion? And number two, Representative Gill, the question was, how would acquiring multiple lands help keep the actual campaign promise of helping everyday Americans afford their day-to-day expenses?
We've got to take the Panama Canal back. We've got to do something, because if we were to happen to go to war with China over Taiwan, and they were to shut the Panama Canal down, we'd have to go 8,000 to 10,000 miles longer just to get things back to the war zone if we had to go from the East Coast to China. It's going to be a fight, and it's going to be a fight that we're going to have to back President Trump on all this and give him an opportunity to make some headway in international diplomacy.
Dumbass football coach Tommy Tuberville is suddenly talking about taking the Panama Canal in case we go to war with China and needing it for supplying Trump's war zones.
I'm a war fighter. I don't want to send our sons and daughters to fight in war. We can literally just control the global markets by taking over areas, not taking over, but by investing in areas that, quite frankly, benefit all of us collectively.
Warfighter Wesley Hunt slipped up and found himself spit-shining Trump's feet by admitting that they suddenly want to take over areas in order to control global markets. Listen again.
Control the global markets by taking over areas, not taking over, but by investing in areas.
Smiles and redirections back to the thinly veiled aspirations to acquire foreign lands like their mentor Vladimir Putin are enough to keep their voters broke and chanting USA over and over again.
Senator Sheehy, I'll tell you, talk about big, beautiful sounds, big, beautiful rings, the Gulf of America. So what do you think about the Gulf of America, Senator Sheehy?
Well, I think it's a great idea, and I was very happy to hear you mention the Monroe Doctrine in your opening statement.
The Greenland, Greenland is I think, a key point for American interest. It's a chokehold, if you will. And here, too, China and Russia nosing around Greenland.
Just like the Panama Canal, these are critical military strategic points of pressure that literally control the world. The world moves through the oceans, the vast majority of our trade. So it's not just military, it's also economic. We should be doing everything we can to revive our global footprint in places like Iceland and Greenland and Panama and across the Pacific.
Incoming Senator Tim Sheehy, who has his own laundry list of issues, is on board with anything his warmonger president is floating off the top of his head. MAGA elected officials get serious with their support, while MAGA supporting pundits make jokes about it to keep their voters pointing and laughing while normalizing the rhetoric as something that they'll suddenly claim to endorse.
I get it. You say that Americans don't have a problem with Canadians, and we don't. But it seems like you have a problem with us, because if I were a citizen of another country and I was a neighbor of the United States, I would consider it a privilege to be taken over by the United States of America. That's what everybody else in the world wants, American citizenship. For some reason, that's repellent to you Canadians. And I find that personally offensive, Premier.
So pay attention, MAGA. While they have you trained to claim anyone that disagrees with the unhinged declarations they keep tossing around, you might want to check your wallets, because the MAGA leadership of lazy billionaires will be taking the last $2.81 out of your back pocket while you laugh. They've already successfully got you to accept a MAGA version of the deep state that you claim to despise, and even more control over your livelihoods, opportunities, and tax code to further benefit their own wealth at your expense. So the reason this president laughs at you behind your back and calls veterans suckers and losers is because he thinks you're too clueless to see it all happening in front of your faces. And he might be right, because before he got you back to his militaristic agenda, he and his friends sold you on this.
We need to clean house of all of the warmongers and America Last globalists and the deep state, the Pentagon, the State Department, and the national security industrial complex. One of the reasons I was the only president in generations who didn't start a war is that I was the only president who rejected the catastrophic advice of many of Washington's generals, bureaucrats, and the so-called diplomats who only know how to get us into conflict, but they don't know how to get us out. These people have been seeking confrontation for a long time, much like the case in Iraq and other parts of the world, and now we're teetering on the brink of World War III.
Under President Trump, if my memory serves me correctly, I don't believe we had any wars. We got a war in Ukraine right now, of which we were funding until we decided to put some heavy sanctions on, which still aren't heavy enough. While President Trump was in office, we didn't have a war, and I think he made 3 peace treaties.
It's not surprising that Kamala and Liz have joined forces because they're warmongers. They don't care about America first. President Trump does. And if you have any question, just remember, no wars under President Trump. These people created wars. God bless the USA. Vote for Trump. Get out and vote now.
So whether this is just a bunch of empty rhetoric or a gauge to see how easily people are willing to go along with it, they're definitely not paying any attention to your grocery prices, your gas prices, childcare, failing education system, or voting to put us further into debt and increasing the deficit that so many people claim to be voting for. So while you laugh, the joke just might be on you.
Why is Donald Trump doing this? And I think the answer is, let's have a big distraction and several more questions so we don't spend more time on Pete Hegseth, the nominee to be the head of the Department of Defense. So we don't spend more time on Tulsi Gabbard, who has been in the pocket of Putin and is not someone who should be trusted with our secrets. So that we don't spend more time on Robert Kennedy's views on vaccines. In other words, we have a job in front of us right now, and that is advise and consent on the nominees who are there to run our government.
I'd agree to working with Donald Trump on renaming the Gulf of Mexico only if he first agrees to work with us on an actual plan to lower costs for Americans. That's what the American people want us to focus on first, not on renaming bodies of water. Our priorities, our democratic priorities, are so much more closely aligned with the concerns of the American people than Donald Trump seemed to be. The incoming president knows he has a tall task ahead of him. He spent years on the campaign trail making outlandish promises he won't be able to keep. In fact, he's getting rich to do the opposite of what he's getting ready to do the opposite of what he promised by cutting tax cuts for the very, very wealthy. Donald Trump is in over his head. So he's doing what he always does in times like this, distract America with crazy ideas.